In the heart of the rural American South, where the sun beats down on the land as intensely as faith warms hearts, lived Jake, a boy of just 8 years old. His eyes, large and dark like ripe blueberries, reflected a wisdom that transcended his tender age. His bare feet knew every inch of that red, drought-cracked earth, and his small hands had learned both to sow and to join in prayer. The town of Angel Creek barely appeared on official maps, but it existed powerfully in the hearts of its inhabitants. It was a place where time seemed to move to the rhythm of church bells, where each weathered house painted in faded colors held stories of generations. There, everyone shared both the little they had and the abundance of their faith. In the house closest to the small chapel lived Jake with his mother, Teresa, and his grandfather, Grandpa Manny. It was a simple dwelling, with a dirt floor and walls that told stories through their cracks. In the yard, an old oak tree bravely withstood the drought, offering generous shade for the intensely hot afternoons. Grandpa Manny had always been the pillar of that family and the guardian of the community's stories. His deep voice filled the evening gatherings with old legends and tales that mixed reality and fantasy. He was the one who had taught Jake to find water by the song of birds, to predict rain by the formation of clouds, and above all, to trust in the invisible power of faith. But 3 months ago, a mysterious illness had struck old Manny. It began with weakness in his legs, followed by a fever that came and went like the tides. Soon, that man who had once radiated vitality was confined to a bed, his eyes once vivid now deep and opaque like dry wells. "It's a heart tired of beating so much," said the only doctor who visited the region once a month. "Or maybe it's the liver protesting years of hard life," suggested the local folk healer, Ms. Noka, after passing branches of herbs over his weakened body. Diagnoses contradicted each other, remedies failed, and hopes dwindled along with Grandpa Manny's strength. It was on a particularly hot afternoon, when the silence of the house was broken only by the buzzing of insects and the labored breathing of his grandfather, that Jake made his decision. Kneeling beside the bed, watching the wrinkled face that had smiled at him so many times, the boy felt something awaken within him, a certainty as deep as the roots of the old oak tree. "I'm going to pray for 30 days without stopping, Grandpa," he whispered, holding the old man's rough, thin hand. "I'm going to ask God for a miracle for you." Grandpa Manny couldn't respond with words, but his teary eyes said enough. A weak squeeze of his hand sealed the silent pact between grandfather and grandson, between the life that was fading and the one that overflowed with hope. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. His small heart beat fast with the magnitude of the promise made. 30 days seemed like an eternity for an 8-year-old child, but something inside him, a benevolent stubbornness that everyone recognized, said he would be capable. Dawn brought the first day of the prayer journey. It was Sunday, church service day at the small chapel of Angel Creek. The rusty bell tolled 3 times, calling the faithful to the celebration. Jake put on his only shirt that had no patches, smoothed his unruly hair with water, and followed his mother to church. The chapel, built by the residents themselves decades before, was simple but welcoming. Its white walls reflected the sunlight that entered through the narrow windows, creating golden beams that danced in the air, filled with incense. The wooden pews, polished by use, accommodated the few dozen inhabitants who attended the weekly ceremony. Father Joe, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a gentle smile, led the service with the familiarity of someone who knew every soul present. He was respected not for the imposition of his position, but for the humility with which he shared the community's difficulties. It was during the sermon, when the priest spoke about persistence in faith, that something unexpected happened. Jake, normally shy and reserved, suddenly stood up. The sudden movement made all eyes turn to him. "Father," he said in a clear voice, surprising even his mother, "can I make a request?" A brief moment of silence swept through the chapel. Father Joe, after the initial surprise, nodded with an understanding smile. "My grandfather is very sick," Jake continued, his small voice echoing on the church walls. "I started today to pray for 30 days without stopping for him to get well. I wanted to ask you and everyone here to pray with me today." The silence that followed was profound, charged with emotion. Teresa, with tears in her eyes, didn't know if she felt pride or shame at her son's exposure. But before she could decide, Father Joe came down from the altar and approached the boy. "Jake," he said, placing his hand on the child's shoulder, "your faith is an example for us all." Turning to the congregation, the priest continued, "Let us all now unite our voices in a special prayer for Grandpa Manny." What followed was a moment of rare unity. Voices rose in prayer, some trembling with emotion, others firm with conviction. The aroma of candles and incense intensified, as if the environment itself responded to the strength of that collective prayer. Jake, in the center of that circle of faith, felt something warm grow in his chest. He didn't know what to call it, but it was as if a small flame had been lit inside him. At the end of the service, many approached to hug the boy and his mother, promising to include Grandpa Manny in their daily prayers. Ms. Clotilde, the oldest in the community, held Jake's hands between hers, gnarled and trembling. "The faith of a child," she said in a voice hoarse with wisdom, "is the most powerful there is, because it is pure as spring water." In the days that followed, Jake established a rigorous routine. He would wake up before sunrise, kneel beside his grandfather's bed, and say his first prayer of the day. During daily tasks, fetching water from the well, helping his mother with the chickens, going to the small town school, he kept a silent prayer on his lips, like a constant mantra. At night, under the flickering light of a kerosene lamp, he would make his last formal prayer before sleeping. Sometimes the tiredness was so great that he fell asleep kneeling, and Teresa would find him like that, with his hands still placed on his chest. On the fifth day, the first small change happened. Dr. Paul, the doctor from the neighboring town who normally visited the region only once a month, unexpectedly returned to Angel Creek. He said he had dreamed of the town and felt he needed to come back. Upon examining Grandpa Manny, he couldn't offer a new diagnosis, but he decided to adjust the medication and, surprisingly, announced that he would stay for a few more days. "Something tells me I should remain," he commented to Teresa, while putting away his stethoscope. His eyes strayed to Jake, who prayed silently in a corner of the room. "Perhaps it is this boy's faith that called me back." The continued presence of the doctor brought new encouragement to the family. Although Grandpa Manny's condition remained stable, neither improving nor worsening significantly, the simple fact of having regular medical attention was a comfort they had not expected. On the 10th day, the town celebrated the traditional procession in honor of Our Lady of Sorrows, the local patron saint. The dirt streets came to life with colorful banners that fluttered in the warm countryside wind. Sacred images, carefully preserved over generations, were adorned with wildflowers. The aroma of incense mingled with the smell of typical foods prepared for the occasion. Jake participated in the procession with redoubled devotion. He carried a lit candle, protecting the flame with his cupped hand, a symbol of the hope he protected in his heart. His lips moved in constant prayer, even when his tired body begged for rest. It was during the moment when the procession rounded the central square that something unusual happened. An elderly lady, whom no one in town seemed to recognize, approached Jake. She had hair as white as cotton and clear, almost transparent eyes that contrasted with her dark, wrinkled skin. She wore simple but impeccably clean clothes and emanated an aura of serenity that made the boy stop instantly. "You have a brave heart, little one," she said in a voice that resembled the whisper of the wind in dry leaves. "You are carrying a great weight for such young shoulders." Before Jake could respond, she took from her neck an old medal, hanging from a leather cord. The medal, worn by time, had engraved on it the image of a saint that the boy did not recognize. "Pray with this close to your heart," instructed the lady, placing the medal in the child's hands. "When faith finds a symbol, it becomes even stronger." Jake wanted to thank her, ask questions, know who that mysterious lady was, but when he looked up again, she had disappeared into the colorful crowd of the procession, as if she had been just an apparition. That night, the boy added the medal to his prayer ritual. He held it firmly between his hands while praying, and then placed it under his grandfather's pillow, hoping that its presence would bring some comfort during the old man's restless sleep. The second week of Jake's spiritual journey brought a phenomenon that the boy initially did not share with anyone, not even his mother. He began to have vivid dreams, so real that upon waking he had difficulty distinguishing them from reality. In these dreams, he always found himself in an open field, bathed in a golden light that did not seem to come from the sun, but from all directions simultaneously. And there, sitting on a smooth stone, was a luminous figure. He couldn't see its face clearly, but he felt a comforting presence, like a hug that envelops without touching. "Prayer is not just asking," said the figure in his dreams in a voice that seemed to come from both outside and inside him. "It is connection. Don't just talk to God. Listen to Him too." In the mornings following these dreams, Jake incorporated what he had learned into his prayers. He began to intersperse moments of requests with periods of absolute silence, trying to hear answers in the subtlest sounds around him. The rustling of the oak tree leaves, the distant song of a bird, even the rhythm of his grandfather's breathing. It was on the 14th day that they noticed the first significant change in Grandpa Manny. During Dr. Paul's afternoon visit, the old man, who for weeks had only been able to lie down, asked to sit up. With visible effort, but even greater determination, he managed to remain sitting on the edge of the bed for almost 10 minutes before fatigue forced him to lie down again. "It's a good sign," commented the doctor, trying to contain his own astonishment. "His body is responding in some way." Teresa wept silently with joy, while Jake felt the small flame in his chest grow a little bigger. That night he prayed with renewed fervor, giving thanks for this first sign of improvement and asking for strength to continue his journey. The news of Grandpa Manny's slight improvement, combined with the story of Jake's promise, began to spread through the town like wildfire. People commented in gatherings in the square, in lines at the small store during family meals. Some saw this as a divine sign. Others, more skeptical, considered it mere coincidence. Father Joe, who initially saw Jake's initiative with eyes of compassionate tenderness, began to notice subtle changes in the community. Attendance at daily services gradually increased. People who had not spoken to each other for years due to old disagreements began to exchange hesitant greetings. Small gestures of solidarity became more common, one family sharing the water from their cistern with less fortunate neighbors, another offering some of their scarce chickens to a recent widow. The following Sunday, during the service, the priest surprised everyone with his sermon. "Our little Jake," he said, looking directly at the boy sitting next to his mother, "has reminded us of the true meaning of faith. It is not just about asking and receiving. It is about transforming ourselves first, and then the world around us." From that day on, the priest began to invite the community to a daily moment of collective prayer for Grandpa Manny's recovery, formalizing what many were already doing individually. The chapel remained open for an additional hour each evening, and the number of participants grew every day. On the 20th day of Jake's journey, something happened that many in town interpreted as the first tangible miracle. The spring that supplied Angel Creek, a small water source that in recent years had been alarmingly diminishing due to the prolonged drought, dawned revitalized. The water, which had previously sprung in a timid trickle, now gushed with surprising force, crystal clear and abundant. The news spread quickly, and soon a small crowd gathered around the spring. Some knelt, making the sign of the cross. Others filled bottles and jugs, as if fearing that the miraculous water might cease at any moment. Many simply watched in reverent silence. "It's a sign," declared Ms. Noka, the folk healer, her voice trembling with emotion. "It is God answering the boy's prayers." 2 days later, a group of technicians from the county seat arrived in town, sent by the regional government to investigate the phenomenon. After some studies, they explained that heavy rains in the distant mountains had recharged the water table, resulting in the revitalization of the spring. "It's science, not a miracle," stated categorically the head of the team, a man with thick glasses and a permanently serious expression. But for many in Angel Creek, including Jake, the two explanations were not mutually exclusive. "God doesn't make things out of nothing," explained the boy simply when questioned. "He uses what already exists in the world. Even Jesus needed bread and fish to make his miracle multiply." This simple wisdom, coming from a child, left even the technicians without an immediate answer. However, not everyone looked favorably upon Jake's growing spiritual influence. Ms. Helen, the teacher at the town's only school, a middle-aged woman who prided herself on her formal education and scientific worldview, began to express concern. Noticing that Jake was arriving at school with increasingly deep, dark circles under his eyes, and had difficulty staying attentive during classes. She requested a conversation with Teresa. "I am worried about your son," she said directly, sitting at the simple table in Teresa's house. "He is exhausted, neglecting his studies, and developing what seems to be a religious obsession. This is not healthy for a child." Teresa, torn between respect for the teacher and belief in the importance of her son's mission, replied in a restrained voice, "I understand your concern, Ms. Helen, but this is important to him, to my father, to all of us. What's important is his physical and mental health," countered the teacher firmly. "Faith is valuable, but it shouldn't consume a child in this way. He needs adequate sleep, time to play, to be a child." The conversation ended without resolution, but its ripples spread through the community. Soon, two informal groups formed, those who supported Jake's spiritual journey, seeing it as a genuine expression of faith, and those who agreed with the teacher, concerned about the impact of this excessive commitment on such a young child. This division created a tense environment, with heated discussions in the central square and distrustful glances between neighbors who had previously shared everything. Ironically, the journey that had begun to bring healing was, at that moment, causing a fracture in the community. Jake felt the weight of this conflict on his small shoulders, but remained firm in his purpose. He continued his prayers, now adding, "A request for the unity of the town. God," he whispered in the silent early mornings, "make them understand that I'm not doing this to cause trouble. It's just because I love my grandfather." On the 25th day, as Jake's journey approached its end, the hardest blow came. Grandpa Manny, who in previous days had shown small but consistent improvements, woke up with a high fever and labored breathing. His fragile body trembled under the patched sheets, and his eyes, again opaque, seemed to gaze at something beyond the straw roof of the house. Dr. Paul was called urgently, and after a thorough examination, his expression revealed deep concern. "It seems like an infection," he explained to Teresa, in a low voice so that Jake, sitting beside his grandfather's bed, would not hear. "His body is too weak to fight it. We must prepare ourselves." He didn't need to finish the sentence. The look of painful understanding in Teresa's eyes completed the unspoken thought. That night, as if sensing the gravity of the situation, a violent storm broke over Angel Creek. It was the first heavy rain in months, normally received with joy by the country folk. But this time, it carried with it a somber energy, with lightning that cut across the sky like luminous scars and thunder that made the structures of the simple houses tremble. Jake knelt by the window, watching the fury of the elements. Silent, tears mixed with the rain that dripped through the cracks in the poorly sealed window. For the first time since the beginning of his journey, he felt his faith waver. "Why, God?" he asked in a broken whisper. "Why let him get worse now, when there are only 5 days left? It's not fair." His mother, finding him like this, knelt beside him and enveloped him in a silent hug. She had no answers to offer, only the loving presence that said, "You are not alone in this pain." For hours they remained like this, mother and son united in silence that transcends words, while the storm gradually lost strength outside, turning into a constant but gentle rain. It was in this moment of deepest darkness that a ray of unexpected hope emerged. From outside the house, through the curtain of rain, hurried footsteps were heard, followed by urgent knocks on the door. When Teresa opened it, there was Mary, her older sister who lived and worked in the county seat, almost 200 miles away. Soaked by the rain, breathless from having traveled for hours, she entered like an apparition. "I had a dream," explained Mary, while drying herself with a cloth offered by her sister. "A dream so real that I couldn't ignore it. I saw our father, calling for me, asking me to come back. I took the first bus I could find." Mary's return brought new energy to the house and to Jake. His aunt, who worked as a nursing assistant in a hospital in the county seat, brought not only practical knowledge to help care for her father, but also the renewed strength that only family reunion can provide in times of crisis. With Mary's guidance, they implemented small changes in the care routine, adjustments to the old man's position to facilitate breathing, compresses to control fever, constant and careful hydration. Simple details, but ones that made a significant difference in Grandpa Manny's comfort. Jake, inspired by his aunt's determination, resumed his prayers with renewed vigor. The moment of doubt from the previous night had not been forgotten, but had transformed into a more mature faith, which recognized the value of perseverance, especially in the darkest moments. On the 27th day, a new character entered the story. Dr. Richard, a specialist doctor who was traveling through the region, collecting data for research on endemic diseases of the countryside, stopped in Angel Creek to refuel his Jeep before continuing his journey. While waiting, he overheard conversations about Grandpa Manny's state of health and his grandson's prayer journey. Intrigued by both the persistence of the illness and the unusual story, he asked to see the patient. After examining Grandpa Manny and reviewing Dr. Paul's notes, the specialist frowned thoughtfully. "These symptoms," he commented, "are very similar to a rare case I treated a few years ago in the city. A little-known autoimmune disease, but treatable with the appropriate medication." Consulting his medical bag, Dr. Richard found some samples of the medication he mentioned. Not enough for a complete treatment, but enough to start and see if there would be a positive response. "I can't promise results," he warned, preparing the first dose, "but it's worth a try." That night, Jake added a new element to his prayers. "Thanks for the unexpected appearance of the specialist doctor. It's as if you sent him at exactly the right time," he whispered upwards, feeling heard by something greater that understood the extent of his needs. In the following 2 days, something remarkable happened. Angel Creek, normally a community divided by small religious differences, began to unite around Jake's cause. The boy's example inspired a wave of solidarity that transcended denominational barriers. On the morning of the 29th day, Jake was surprised to find at his door a diverse group. Mr. Anthony, known for being a fervent practitioner of Candomblé, Pastor Elijah from the small evangelical congregation located on the outskirts of town, and Father Joe, representing the Catholic majority of the community. "We have come to unite our prayers with yours, boy," explained Mr. Anthony with dignity in his deep voice, "each in our own way, but all with the same purpose." What followed was an unusual scene for the standards of Angel Creek. In the simple living room of Teresa's house, representatives of different spiritual traditions sat in a circle. Pastor Elijah read passages from his well-worn Bible. Mr. Anthony chanted ancestral songs in a language that few understood but everyone felt. Father Joe recited prayers in Latin, his voice reverberating on the clay walls. And in the center of this improbable circle was Jake, with his eyes closed and his hands clasped, silently marveling at the strength that his small initiative had unleashed. At dusk on this same day, while the religious leaders had already left but the energy of their prayers seemed to still linger in the air, what many would later call the miracle of Angel Creek happened. Grandpa Manny, who still that morning had been semi-conscious and feverish, opened his eyes with a clarity he had not shown for weeks. He looked around as if recognizing his surroundings, and then, in a weak but perfectly audible voice, asked, "Water. I'm thirsty." Teresa, who was tidying clothes at the foot of the bed, dropped the basin she was holding. Mary, who was preparing a medicinal tea in the kitchen, ran in hearing the noise. Jake, who was praying in the yard under the oak tree, felt an inexplicable tremor even before hearing the excited calls of his mother and aunt. When he ran into the room and saw his grandfather sitting in bed drinking water with Mary's help, Jake felt his legs weaken. He knelt down, not intentionally but out of pure emotion that made him momentarily lose control over his own body. "Grandpa," was all he could say, while tears of joy streamed down his small face. Grandpa Manny extended his trembling hand, touching his grandson's face with the delicacy of someone touching a sacred relic. "I heard your prayers, boy," he said in a hoarse voice. "Even in the moments when it seemed like I was too far away to hear anything, I heard you." The news spread through the town like wind across an open field. In a matter of hours, the house was surrounded by neighbors who wanted to witness the miracle with their own eyes. Some brought food, others wildflowers picked in haste. All brought faces illuminated by renewed hope. The 30th day of Jake's journey, the last of his promise, turned into a spontaneous celebration. People came and went throughout the day, leaving simple gifts and taking with them the testimony that faith, especially when born of a pure heart, was still capable of moving mountains, or, in this case, returning life to a body that seemed destined to say goodbye to it. Dr. Paul and Dr. Richard, observing Grandpa Manny's constant improvement, exchanged glances of scientific astonishment. "The experimental medication is working surprisingly well," commented Dr. Richard, checking the old man's increasingly stable vital signs. "Yes," agreed Dr. Paul, "but it doesn't explain the speed of this recovery, nor the perfect coincidence with the 30th day of prayers, the revelation that it was not only prayer, but also modern medicine that had contributed to Grandpa Manny's recovery, created a profound moment of reflection in Angel Creek. For some, like Ms. Helen, it was confirmation that science always prevailed. For others, like Father Joe, it was evidence that God worked through the means available, including human knowledge. For Jake, the explanation was simpler. God sent the doctor at the right time. That's how miracles happen sometimes. In the 16 months that followed, Angel Creek transformed in ways that transcended the physical recovery of a single man. Inspired by Jake's example of perseverance and faith, the residents mobilized to improve local conditions. With hands united by community work, they built a small health post that would allow for regular medical care. They renovated the school, adding a modest library with books donated by institutions in the county seat. They implemented a more efficient rainwater harvesting system, taking advantage of the technical knowledge shared by the specialists who visited the town. Grandpa Manny recovered gradually, although with some permanent limitations. His steps, once firm, now needed the support of a handmade cane, carved by himself during his convalescence. His voice, once as powerful as thunder, had become softer, forcing listeners to come closer to hear his stories. But these limitations were small compared to the miracle of his continued presence among the living. As for Jake, the experience transformed him in profound and lasting ways. The child who had begun the journey with a simple and unwavering faith emerged with a more mature understanding of the complex relationship between the divine and the human, between miracles and earthly efforts, between prayer and action. "The real miracle," he would say to anyone who asked about his experience, "wasn't just my grandfather getting well. It was seeing how we all changed, how the whole town transformed." At the traditional end-of-year festival, held under a starry sky that seemed brighter than normal, Angel Creek celebrated not only Grandpa Manny's recovery, but the rebirth of its own community spirit. Long tables covered with handmade lace, tablecloths held typical dishes prepared collectively: cured meat, rice and beans, fresh coconut candy, corn and cassava cakes. The sound of accordions and triangles filled conversations and laughter, while around the central bonfire, stories of personal transformation were shared like intimate treasures. It was during this celebration that the mysterious lady of the medal reappeared. She arrived silently in the same simple and immaculate dress, the same hair as white as a cloud. This time, however, she did not disappear into the crowd. She approached Jake and his family, who recognized her immediately. "The Lady of the Medal!" exclaimed the boy, instinctively touching the small metallic object he still wore around his neck. The woman smiled serenely. "My name is Connie," she did. "I was a healer in this region for many years until false accusations forced me to leave. Today, I returned to close a circle." It was then that Grandpa Manny, looking more closely at the newcomer, felt a sudden recognition flash through his memory like lightning. "Connie from the hills," he murmured, his eyes moist with the emotion of remembrance. "The woman who saved my mother from a difficult birth. The woman who was later unjustly accused of witchcraft and expelled from these lands." The revelation created a moment of reverent silence in the group that had formed around them. It was a chapter of local history that many preferred to forget, an episode of injustice born of fear and ignorance. "I returned because I felt it was the right time," explained Connie, with the dignity of someone who carried her pain without allowing it to turn into bitterness. This boy's faith paved the way for many healings, not only of his grandfather's body, but of the invisible wounds that divided this community. At that moment, Father Joe approached and, in a public gesture of reconciliation, took Connie's hands between his own. "In the name of this community and the church I represent, I ask forgiveness for the unjust suffering that was imposed on you," he declared, his voice amplified by the attentive silence that surrounded him. "Your wisdom has always belonged to these lands." The symbolic act of Connie's reintegration into the community represented the final healing, not only physical or individual, but of the collective memory and social conscience of Angel Creek. And so, a simple child armed only with his unwavering faith and determination not only witnessed a miracle, but became a catalyst for transformations that transcended his initial intention. Jake, who had begun praying for his grandfather's health, ended up provoking the spiritual and social rebirth of an entire community. The residents of Angel Creek learned that miracles are not only supernatural and inexplicable events, but also the result of the convergence between persistent faith, community action, and technical knowledge, all united by the invisible thread of love that connects human beings to each other and to something greater than all. Many years later, when visitors asked about the origin of the peculiar spirit of solidarity that distinguished Angel Creek from neighboring communities, the residents would tell the story of the boy who prayed for 30 days. They would tell of the grandfather who returned from the brink of death, of the spring that revived, of the healer who returned to complete a cycle of reconciliation. And at the center of this narrative, like its beating heart, was the simple truth that Jake had discovered. The most powerful prayers are not those that change only external circumstances, but those that transform human hearts, inspiring them to build, with their own hands, the miracles for which they pray. And as the sun set over that piece of countryside, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, the most attentive could see, in the silhouette of a boy sitting under the old oak tree, the living reminder that faith, when born of a pure and persistent heart, is still capable of moving the world, one heart, one community, one transformation at a time.